Hello. Um, this video is going to be an answer to a query I got about what is cheese. It actually, the question was also what is historical, what is fun lists, and what is cheese. The only one that I really can speak of is the cheese one, as I am myself a competitive player and I have been occasionally accused of cheesing, although I'm definitely not the best cheese list builder in my group. Then that's the mindset I'm coming from. I completely agree that there are different ways that you can enjoy bold action. Some people enjoy the history of it. Some people enjoy the role playing aspect. Some people enjoy the common where you tell a story on the tabletop. Some people just want to have fun and throw down a few dice and have a beer and pretzels kind of game. That's not me. I enjoy the competitive aspects of it. And I think that bold actions should be big enough to include every one of those kinds of enjoyment. That's at least that's my mindset about the different types of players that we have and the different aspects of it. And I do know that there are some who find the other how other people enjoy the game distasteful. I think a lot of that is down to just simple miscommunication of intention and desire, what it is that you want to have out of your game. So, all that aside, here is my explanation for what is cheese and how can you sort of spot cheese in a list. The first thing I would like to say is cheaply priced units. There are some units in the game that are simply undercosted, that come way too cheap for what they can actually put out in damage. And there are some units or some choices where you pay way too many points for something that is really not very good. One of the classic examples is the LMG. An LMG on a foot soldier costs 20 points across the board for all armies, right? But if you pick an MMG getting one extra shot for your transport truck, then it costs 15 points. Where is the logic in that? You can buy a very mobile MMG on a transport that is not as killable as an individual soldier 5 points cheaper with an extra shot. It makes no sense. So there are some things that are priced according to a pricing rule set that Warlord Games developed at some point, where the pricing just does not make sense in the actual game. It makes sense according to those the mathematical calculations that they made, but it makes no sense in the game. So when we're looking at cheese, one of the things to look for is cheaply priced units for what they can do. And that's something that you can only really get a feeling of from having played the game for a bit, from having built different lists, from having looked through different stuff. Because some units, you just don't, you can't really predict that they are one of the cheaply priced ones or they are overpriced for what they do, right? A good place to look for overpriced units is in tanks, for instance. Heavy tanks are way overcosted for what they can do because most of them have one shot with their main gun, right? And then they maybe have two machine guns, but two machine guns. Do you really want to pay 400 points for two machine guns? No, you don't. You can get them 15 points on your trucks. So the offensive output does not really match up for heavy tanks. But if you look at light tanks, especially perhaps the Stuart or the, what's it called, M15 Polizei tank for the Germans and Italians, those are really cheap, really crappy tanks. And in reality, they were crap. But in the game, they have so many machine guns and they can split fire because their weapon systems are mounted. Some of them in the turret, some of them are pintle mounted, some of them are in the hull. So they can split fire every which way, which makes them very, very usable in a game where pinning different units count. So they are cheaply priced for what they deliver. Another thing that you might look for in a cheesy list is ahistorical units. It's units that were not really used historically, but that you can build. Some of them I would recommend that you don't build, simply because you will piss people off no end. One of them being Gurkhas. It's like a famous internet meme by now, that that you can pick a Gurkha unit for the British, and then using the national special rules for the New Zealanders, you can make them Maori, getting up and at 'em and blood curling charge and extra assaults because they're tough as boots. All of that into an already overpowered close combat unit, the Gurkhas. The Gurkhas are really good close combat unit, right? But you can also make them Maori, making them extra overpowered. But Gurkhas were a specific group of people from Nepal. They were not from New Zealand. They were definitely not Maoris, who is another specific group of people, right? So you will piss people off if you do that. Ahistorical units. Another ahistorical unit that is also extremely cheaply priced for what it does is the Japanese bamboo spear fighters. I don't think that they were actually ever used in combat. Maybe they had like one charge at some point. And they were worth nothing. They were crap. They were basically bullet fodder for American machine guns. But in the game, in bolt action, they are extremely good. They are one of the best priced close combat units because they're so cheap. So what you will often see is Japanese armies who have a lot of spear fighters in them, in their list. That is cheesy because it has nothing to do with history. It has nothing to do with reality. It is ahistorical unit choices where they pick a unit simply because it's very, very good in the game and not because it had any effect on World War II. Cheese. Another thing that you might look for is when you're mixing time periods or theaters. I do this myself a bit. I mainly play. I have one army basically, and that is my 8th Army. I have a British 8th Army. So I play Brits. That's it. But in that British 8th Army, I just painted up an LVT Buffalo. Were there any water fighting in the desert? No? So that is a cheese concept, right? I don't even think they may have had access to some LVTs when they invaded Sicily with the 8th Army, but come on, really. All of my other dudes are painted to look like they're in the desert. So that is just me ahistorically mixing in different types of units where I think that they might fit my playstyle or I want the model or whatever. So mixing theaters and time periods. You also see this if you look at WTC lists. You will see that many people are using Dhaka Stuarts, these Stuarts with the sponson-mounted LMGs. They're really good. They're really cheap. But Dhaka Stuarts were mainly used until 1942, but they will quite often happily put them into their American Battle of the Bulge armies or whatever, where there were no Dhaka Stuarts, because mix and match of time periods. Then we have the concept of min-maxing. Min-maxing is something that we learned from 40k and Warhammer. It's when you make sure that your unit size matches up to what you expect your unit to do. Especially minimizing in bold action is a thing. Maximizing is not that often a thing because we don't really have units where you can have synergies where they become Death Star-like units. which was a thing in 40k and Warhammer, right? That's not really something you can do in bold action, but you can minimize. What you do when you minimize is you take a unit and you make them as cheap as possible. A good place to see this is in Russian Strafbat units. If you can take a Russian Strafbat unit and you make them green or whatever, you make them unarmed, you can sort of like cut them down in price, and then down to 5-man units, as small as you can make them. You're making it as cheap as possible. Then you maybe get an order dice for like 20 points-ish, 25 points, which is extremely cheap for an order dice. Then you have an order dice to make sure that you win the dice draw when you need it for something that can kill. So your minimized units, they have no effect on the game most of the time. Sometimes you can maybe get them to move up onto an objective, but most of the time they have no effect. What you're doing instead is you're using their order dice to activate the things that you want to activate, that will kill the enemy early on when you need it to activate. So that is min-maxing in bold action. You can also recognize a cheesy list by how much it is spamming one thing. So for instance, you might have a list that is spamming Bren carriers. I like my Bren carrier. I only have one. I own one Bren carrier. I'm not a spammer of Bren carriers. But you might see, I went to Scotland to play in the Scottish Nationals, and we saw several lists that had 3, maybe 4 Bren carriers in them. With the pintle-mounted LMG and the hull-mounted LMG, and then 5 men something nasty in them. Engineers or Gurkhas or something nasty anyways, right? SMG equipped Russian veterans or something. And what they would do is they would take as many as they could of their infantry choices, and as many as they could point-wise of these Bren carriers, because they are armored. So they would spam the same unit again and again and again, and then just rush one point of the enemy. So having several of the same unit type, that would typically be spamming. And that would typically be a sign that someone is cheating that list. At least that's when I make list reviews. You can see on my channel there are a lot of list reviews, and that is what I look for when I'm looking for how competitive is this list. Does it spam something good? That's one of the things that I'm watching out for. I also watch out for national special rules, and this one is a bit contentious because what's really good, right? But to my mind, the British, because they can choose their national special rules, so you can sort of tailor it to what you want to do. The Japanese, because Fanatic for free, it costs 3 points for the German SS to get Fanatics, but the Japanese get them on all their dudes for free. Bam! That is very, very good. Russians have some very nice special rules, especially from bombardments and stuff. Also to re-roll leaderships, which you can't do in other lists. And then the Finns. Those 4 national nations get really nice special rules that you can sort of see are cheesy if you play to those rules. So if your list building plays to those rules and your playstyle plays to those rules, then you are cheesing a bit. I like it. No, I don't eat cheese at all, but I like the cheesing bit of, yeah, whatever. Finally, we have some units that are just overpowered rules-wise in the game right now. For me, that is multi-rocket launchers. Multi-rocket launchers is sort of a win big or go home sort of weapon system. And you can see lists that spam multi-rocket launchers. Like I played against Manuel's 4 multi-rocket launcher list at the last tournament I played in. And that's a difficult list to play against. It's not impossible, but it's really difficult, because if you're clumping up, then he can hit several units at a time, and he will roll those sixes. With 4 units shooting multi-rockets at you, he will roll sixes, and you will get hit, and you will get killed. So the multi-rocket launcher is really good if the enemy sort of clumps up. If the enemy doesn't do that, not so good. But then again, the multi-rocket launcher actively encourages your enemy to divide their forces, which can be good again. Just saying. And the other piece of equipment that I would say is right now is OP in the rules is the flamer. In real life Second World War, yes, flamers were effective, but they were really difficult to get up and engage the enemy with. You basically had to have static enemies that you had to sort of sneak the flamethrower up towards, or you had to have a vehicle-mounted flamethrower to bring it up to a bunker or whatever, and then scare the enemy into surrendering. That was how they worked in real life. They were horribly vulnerable. But in the game, in bolt action, you just chuck them into a transport, ride them up, unload, and kill stuff. And they kill units so easily. So they are very overpowered right now. Final unit that I would say is overpowered for what it did in real life is the Russian bomb dogs. God damn it, those bomb dogs are just insane. It's the only unit in the game that always hits on a 4+. No matter how many pins you have on that unit, they will always hit on a 4+. Because it's a dog. Yes, you might hit your own transports or tanks. Rolling a 1, that's a thing, it happens. But it is extremely good for what it does, and it hits really hard when they do hit. So that is also OP in my opinion. So that is my list of things that are cheesy. I hope you can use it for something. Cheers. Bye.